Who here has seen The Matrix? See some hands. It's an old movie now. But you don't need to see the movie to understand the basic premise. The movie is about this world in which the people are living in what would look like our ordinary lives, but they're actually living in what's called the Matrix, which is this alternate reality. And early in the movie, the main character of the movie is starting to realize that something about the world doesn't seem right. And all of a sudden, he has this character come and offer him a choice. He says, I can give you this red pill, and if you take this red pill, you will see the world as it really is. He says, or you can take this blue pill, you'll forget my encounter with you, and you can keep going as if nothing happened. And in the end, the character chooses the red pill, and then he ends up becoming the one who's going to try to take down this matrix and restore the world as it was supposed to be. So that's the story of the Matrix, but what it comes down to is this choice. Are you going to pick the red pill and see the world as it really is, or are you going to pick the blue pill? Now, in today's world on social media, people have become very popular in talking about red pill versus blue pill, and if you take this red pill, it's supposed to open your eyes to certain ideologies. Now, I'm not trying to say that any of those ideologies is something that I necessarily know about or want to support, but the idea is that people are starting to pick up on this idea of the red pill to open your eyes to reality. Now, long before that, people are doing on social media, the question has been, do we humans want to look at Jesus and listen to his story? Because what he is offering to us is the choice. Do we want the red pill to see the world as it was made to be? Or do we want the blue pill to see the world how we want and to continue living the way we've always lived? Now, Lent is about looking at the world and noticing the darkness and the death and the chaos and the sin and thinking about it. And what Jesus wants to offer us is that red pill, the opportunity to see the world as it really is, which isn't all bad, but acknowledges that there's a lot that isn't right. And today's story from John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41, is Jesus offering to a number of different people that he encounters this opportunity. Are they going to see the world like the red pill as he sees it, or are they going to continue to see the world as they see it? So you take out your Bible and turn to chapter 9 of John. In the Pew Bible, that's page 1525 in here. It will be on the screen as well if you'd rather just follow along. Chapter 9 of John, verses 1 through 41. So let's take a look at this passage from John. This is how it opens up for us. Verse 1 of chapter 9 of John. As he went along, he saw the blind man from birth. Now, we're joining Jesus in Jerusalem. If you were here last week, Jesus was traveling to Jerusalem. So he made that unusual path through Samaria. But later in John, he gets there, he goes to what's called the tabernacle, or the Festival of Tabernacles, or the Festival of Booths. It's this Jewish festival where they build these outdoor structures to remember their time in the wilderness. So Jesus goes to Jerusalem to celebrate that, because that's what, if you could go, you did as a Jewish person in the first century. So he goes, he's in Jerusalem, and he has some encounters with the religious leaders. He ruffles some feathers, he upsets some people. And now we join him in chapter 9. He's still in Jerusalem. We don't know how much time has passed. But now he encounters, we're told, a man who was blind from birth. Now that is important because of what we're going to see in a minute. The man was blind from birth. So this is what happens. Verse 2. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? So now what we're seeing is Jesus' disciples asking him a question, because in the ancient world, it was commonly believed that your sins had a direct relationship with illness, sickness, and death. In a different gospel, Jesus is asked, after a tower in a nearby city falls and some people get crushed by it, Jesus is asked, well, who caused that to happen? Who sinned that tower would fall? And here, we see a different example of that where this man was born blind, and so his disciples want to know, did his parents do that? Was it something that he did before he was even born? So what we're seeing is the clash of the views of the world. The blue pill view for the disciples and all of the ancient world was, if you do bad things, you can have a direct connection. Now, we obviously understand if you do something to hurt somebody, they might be hurt. Like, we understand that connection. But we don't think that if you steal that you could become sick next week. Now, there actually probably are people who think that, but for the most part, that's not what we think in our world. In the ancient world, they thought that. If parents did enough sin, they could cause a child to be born with an illness or to have some sort of birth defect. So Jesus is going to challenge his disciples. And this is what he says in verse 3. Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So now Jesus says it was actually no one. And then what he says can be really difficult for us to hear. It was for God's work. So does that mean that God somehow caused this man to be born blind so that years down the road he could be healed? Now, what I think is that it's a little more complicated than that. I don't think that God causes bad things to happen to us. I don't think he gives us cancer. I don't think he causes people to get sick. That's the result of the brokenness of the world. But what God does do is he comes into that brokenness, and there are times, it's not always a guarantee, where he's going to intervene. Now, we have coming the cross and the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate answer to the brokenness of the world. So when we say, is God going to solve the problems of sin and sickness and death? The answer is yes. He does not heal every sick person, because death is still at the end, but he deals with all of it through the death and resurrection of Jesus. But in the middle, we can still hope and pray to God to intervene. He doesn't always, but he has done the work. But in this case, Jesus says, this is an opportunity for me to do the work of my Father, for me to show what my Father wants to do for the whole world. And so, Jesus does this. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Salem. This means sent. So that the man went and washed, and he came home seeing. So Jesus heals the man. And this is then what happens. Verse 8. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Someone claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looked like him. But he himself insisted, I am the man. How then were your eyes opened, they asked. He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Salem and wash, so I went and washed. And then I could see. Where is this man? They asked him. I don't know, he said. So that's this encounter Jesus has with this man. Jesus rejects that the man's sin or one of his parents' sins caused his illness. Instead, illness is the result of the broken world, but God's work is to restore the broken world. And so Jesus says to his disciples, you have a choice. I'm challenging your assumptions. You assume the world is this way. And I'm actually telling you, no, the world is this way. Are you going to believe me or not? We must leave behind our way to live the Jesus way. We have to choose. We must leave behind our way to live the Jesus way. So Jesus challenges his disciples' assumptions, but it's not just his disciples. There's an opportunity for him to encounter and dialogue with even more people in his world about these ideas. So verse 13, this is what happens next. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was the Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, "How can a sinner perform such signs?" So they were divided. Then they turned again to the blind man. "What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened." The man replied, "He is a prophet." So now Jesus, or the man that Jesus heals, is brought before the religious leaders. This was a common thing. For one, the religious leaders had a really involved presence in all of the lives of the Jewish people, specifically if you lived in Jerusalem where they were all living as well. But also, there's one story even where Jesus heals someone and tells them to go and give to pay the sacrifice or the fee for being healed. Part of the law of Moses was if you were cleansed from certain impurities, there was an offering involved with that. So Jesus recognized that the religious leaders had an important role in these people's lives. And they want to know how this man was healed. Some say, okay, this man healed him, so he must be from God. Others said, no, he healed the man on the Sabbath, so he can't be from God, because the religious leaders had their own structures and systems. Now, the command we heard earlier today was honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Don't work on the Sabbath or rest on the Sabbath. But the Jewish people in the time of Jesus, the Pharisees specifically, had created this whole system to help their fellow Jews not work on the Sabbath. And so Jesus just doesn't care about their system. He says, I'm going to heal this man, and he does. Now remember, he'd already ruffled feathers. And now, if he's doing this, he's going to upset even more people. It's not clear yet, though, that they know who he is. But still, they want to know who this man is because he's healing on the Sabbath. He's challenging their system. And he's doing it in a very miraculous way. They're not very happy. So this is what happens. Verse 18. They don't believe the man, so they still do not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. So they're like, okay, we need to ask somebody else. So they asked the parents, is this your son? They asked. Is this the one you say was born blind? Yes. Or how is it that he can now see? And this is the response from the parents. We know he is our son, the parents answered, and we know he was born blind, but how he can now see or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Ask him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, who had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So now they go to the parents. And they want to know, okay, is this your son? Was he actually born blind? So the parents say, yes, he's our son, but they're not willing to answer. Instead, they say, he's of age. He's a legal adult. You ask him. But then John tells us the real reason why. The religious leaders are already challenged by Jesus. He's already challenging their structures. And so they say anybody who follows Jesus is not going to be part of the synagogue. Now, for them, the synagogue was like our weekly Sunday morning service. That's what they did every week. But if you did not do what the religious leaders said, they could tell you could no longer come to synagogue. So the parents are not going to do that. So under all of this is Jesus challenging their standards. Jesus saying, you've made these rules and these standards and these expectations for your people, and I reject them. So the religious leaders are also encountering Jesus, and they have to ask the question, are we going to take the red pill or the blue? Are we going to listen to the way of Jesus, or are we going to listen to our own way? And this is what happens, verse 24. So they go back to the blind man. A second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they said. We know this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I have told you already, and you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, you are this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, But as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from." The man answered, "Now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. He listens to the godly person who does his will. Nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." So the religious leaders asked the man again. When it comes down to it, he reveals that he believes in the man. So this is what they end up doing. Verse 34. To this they reply, "You were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us?" And they threw him out. So basically this man pushes. He says, "Wait a minute. You don't know where he comes from. We don't know of people healing the blind. There could only be one person this person comes from, God." But the religious leaders don't want to hear that. They don't want their standards, their expectations challenged. And so they throw the man out. They say, "You are gone. We must leave behind our way to live the way of Jesus." We must leave behind our standards. It's not just our expectations, it's our standards. We create standards for ourselves, for our family members, for our children. We expect them to live certain ways. Now, that's not a bad thing. But we have to have this awareness that our standards might not actually be what God is asking us to. Jesus comes and he says to these religious leaders, you have to think about your standards again. If your standards are such that you see a miracle and you throw the man out because he believes in the person who healed him, you're nowhere near my way. We must leave behind our way to live the Jesus way. Everyone in the story, the religious leaders, the disciples, the blind man, his family, anybody who's watching from the sidelines, they all must decide the same question. Are they going to trust Jesus, the red pill, or are they going to trust themselves, the blue pill? And this is what happens. Verse 35, Jesus heard that they had thrown him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" "Who is he, sir?" the man asked. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You know him," or Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." The man said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshiped him. So first is the blind man. Jesus goes and finds him and he says, "I heard you've been thrown out, but do you believe in the Son of Man?" And through the conversation, the man is able to see, the blind man is able to see that Jesus is saying, "I am the Son of Man. I am the Son of Man," or the one who comes from God, the anointed Messiah. And when the man hears it, he says, "I believe," and he worships Jesus. He's willing to take that red pill, even if it means he's no longer able to worship with his family in the synagogue. Even if it means the religious leaders are going to continue to ridicule him because he will continue to tell others about what happened. Certainly he's going to tell more people, especially when they're like, "Hey, you were blind. What happened?" And he gets to tell them. They're not going to like that. But he says, "I believe in Jesus." We must leave behind our way to live the Jesus way. But what about the religious leaders? Verse 39. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and those who see will become blind." Some Pharisees who were with him heard him say this and asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim you see, your guilt remains." So the religious leaders are unwilling to see things Jesus' way. They're unwilling to take the red pill. They want to keep things their way. They want to keep their own assumptions and their own standards. And Jesus says, "Okay, well, now that you've chosen, you're blind." And to that moment, you might not have been blind. You maybe just didn't know. But now I'm here standing before you, and you're rejecting me. So you're blind. We must leave behind our way to live the Jesus way. In Jesus' day, it was common to assume that sin directly caused illness, disease, disability, and death. But Jesus challenged this assumption. And in Jesus' day, the Jewish religious leaders created all kinds of standards and expectations for their people. And Jesus challenged those standards and he challenged those expectations. And in both cases, what Jesus was really doing was he was saying to the people of his day, he was saying, are you going to choose my way or live your way? Which is it? We must leave behind our way to live the Jesus way. This is what Lent's about. We see the world. Now, the world around us, the broader culture, gives us all kinds of answers as to why the world is the way it is. But we have a choice. Are we going to listen to the way of Jesus? Or are we going to listen to the noise around us and keep living the way we've always lived? Now, Lent pushes us to think about all the brokenness. There's only one story that gives us any hope, and that's the story of Jesus. Are we going to leave our way to live the Jesus way, or are we going to remain on our own way? That's the question we have to ask today. Now, there's a way to start on the Jesus way. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to begin to re-synchronize our rhythms of life with the rhythms of God. And the way that we do that is through worship. And worship isn't just what we do today, it's what we do every day. Now here at Salem Magley, the way that we really help everyone think about that is through things like the church calendar and the seasons of the year and how we do things differently for each rhythm. And for Lent, we're doing some extra things to help you with your rhythms. That is Wednesday nights, inviting you to come and have a conversation, but also to have a meal. And then that's the rest of the week at 8 p.m. to stop what you're doing for 10 minutes to put your rhythm in sync with the rhythms of God. Now, I know that that is inconvenient, but this is what I want all of you to know. That's the point. It's supposed to be inconvenient because we have our own rhythms, our own way. And we have to ask ourselves, are we going to continue to live this rhythm, or are we going to say no and start to let our rhythms sync up with God? Now, that's only the beginning. Remember, the religious leaders were good at creating rhythms. They were good at saying to their people, if you just live this way, you will be holy. But of course, that became a burden for them. And what Jesus is saying is that's not what it's about. It's not about living a certain way and keeping certain rules. It's about who you are in your heart. Now, the rhythms are supposed to change your heart, but it starts somewhere. And that's why it starts with new habits and new rhythms and new expectations for ourselves. And Lent's a great opportunity to do that. To say no to our way and to live the Jesus way. So you can start now. Or wait until Holy Week. We have like about 3 weeks, I think, until Holy Week. It's the first week of April, the first full week of April. I've already given you all that we're doing. That's an opportunity to say, I'm going to make Holy Week a week about living God's rhythms. And the way you do that, you start with yourself. Every day, pick a time to pray, read the Bible. You can join us at 8 p.m. for a prayer. I understand some people work. It's not about when it's really, like when you really have something in the way, I understand that. And there's weeks or days where maybe you have to be somewhere. But it's about, are we actually looking at trying to put ourselves in this rhythm? 8 p.m. Now, Holy Week, we don't have the Wednesday night meal. Instead, we have Wednesday night prayer because Thursday night we have the Maundy, Thursday service at 7 p.m. And then we have sunrise service on Sunday morning and Sunday service. Now, sunrise and Sunday worship are different. They're part of the story. Sunday morning, sunrise tells the resurrection story. Sunrise worship, we celebrate. If you want to get the whole story, we got to go to both. It's not just there. It's something for us to do. It's part of this story. It's about putting our rhythms into God's rhythms and letting that start to shape our lives. And this is where we begin. So if you want to start to leave behind your way to live the Jesus way, well, you can start with your rhythms. Are you prepared to have a different life? Are you prepared to be different? Are you ready to choose the Jesus way and leave behind your old way? We must leave behind our way to live the Jesus way.